While the entire nation is gripped with the IPL fever, it is quite strange for us to talk about an old-fashioned rivalry. But yes, that is what we're going to discuss. We're going to discuss the India-Australia rivalry over the years, especially in Test cricket. And for that, it's an absolute honor for me to have with me today on the SNS Cricket Diaries, Andrew Menczel, also known as Menners. Hi, Menners. How are you doing?
Good, Siddharth. Great to be with you.
For me, it's a personal honor to have Andrew, and I'll call him Menace, as he's fondly
Yes,
known
please.
as, because I have been listening to his podcast, the Unfiltered Cricket Podcast, for the last few months, and it's an absolute honor to have him because he has the insight on the game which very few people learn, and I would encourage my listeners and viewers to please go and listen to the Unfiltered Cricket Podcast. Andrew Menczel founded the show of Unfiltered Cricket podcast in 2013, and he is a cricket commentator in Australia on both men's and women's matches. He has interviewed 15 Australian captains and numerous cricketers. He is also an award winning interviewer and podcast producer. So, for an aspiring podcaster like me, I'm sure that I'm going to learn a lot today from Andrew. So, first of all, Andrew, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing really well, Siddharth. Thanks so much for having me on. And I have been gripped by IPL fever as well. I know we're going to be talking about an old-fashioned rivalry, but the time difference is not fantastic for Australians. But every morning, rest assured, the first thing I do is check what happened in the IPL overnight, and then the second thing I do is put on the highlights. And it has been phenomenal to see the batters dominate the way they have. I wouldn't want to be a bowler at the moment. I think if you're a bowler, you'd be feeling pretty down on yourself. But yeah, it's been a joy to watch.
It's interesting, Andrew, that you talk about following the IPL. So, although this is not part of my questions that I had for you today, but would just like to ask you that how is IPL viewed by the general cricket public in Australia?
It's become more popular, especially in the last few years. It's been on pay television here, which has enabled a lot more people to watch it. As I said, the only disadvantage is the time difference. The matches start around midnight our time, so most people are going to bed. The early matches, though, the afternoon matches on the weekend, are really good because they start around prime time in Australia at 8 p.m. But I've noticed this year they're only playing the afternoon games on a Sunday because I think they're much more valuable if they're broadcast in prime time. So that's not great for Australian fans. But I know most cricket fans here are like me. They follow it pretty closely. They definitely watch the highlights on the pay television provider. So it's become more and more relevant. And the amount of money on offer is jaw dropping. So when you've got Mitchell Stark going for millions and millions of dollars, Pat Cummins the same, then cricket fans here are following it. But if it was just a bit more of a friendly time, I think it would be a lot more popular. But it is definitely hands down, far and away, the best T20 league in the world by a long way. And I think any cricket fan would know that.
Great. Maybe I'd love to do a podcast with you on IPL on a separate date. But yeah, coming back to the
Yes.
theme for the day today, Andrew, and for my public, it's the India-Australia rivalry. Now, over the years, over many decades, India-Pakistan has been the rivalry that has been most talked about when it comes to the Indian team. But due to various reasons, India hasn't been playing Pakistan in Test cricket for many years now. And in fact, even when they did play in the mid 2000s, it was after a long gap. So there has been a lot of lull in between when they have played. So the rivalry has not really taken shape or has not grown as much as people would have liked. But the beneficiary here has been the Australian team, and the India-Australia rivalry, Andrew, has taken on in a big way ever since I think I started watching Test cricket in back in '96 when the Border Gavaskar Trophy was first unveiled. And from then on, the rivalry has gone on from strength to strength. It has shifted hands. The trophy has shifted hands from one team to the other till probably about 2018 when India won for the first time in Australia. And since then, the Aussies have not been able to get it back. Now, I understand, Andrew, that you are very busy, and one podcast is not enough to talk about the rivalry. But I have been able to point out a few series in between, which I would like to talk about. And obviously, being an India-centric show, so I'm going to talk about the ones that we have won, and yeah, we
No.
have to talk about the ones that we lost. But then Yeah, I think it'll be wonderful to have your view as an Australian on the series that India have won, especially the ones in Australia. But
Mm.
starting off, Andrew, you, how has been your experience of visiting India for covering cricket?
Zero. I've never been to India for any cricket, and it is something I'm desperate to do. I was actually going to say, payment for coming on this podcast is when I come to Delhi, you have to take me out for a coffee and show me the city. But yeah, no, I've never been to India to see cricket live, but fortunate to see a lot of cricket in Australia when India have toured here, going right back to 1992 when. Which for me is a very special test match when India toured here. It was the last time they toured for a 5 test match series, and they played a famous test match at the SCG where Shane Warne made his test debut. And I vividly remember it coming up on the screen, Shane Warne, the 350th Australian Test cricketer, and he entered the field. And in that match, Ravi Shastri scored a double century, but also a very young Sachin Tendulkar scored one of the best hundreds I've ever seen. I think he was 148 not out. And that match has stayed in my memory for a long time. Seeing the birth of Tendulkar up close and also the debut of the great Shane Warne.
Well, that's interesting. I would not have any memories of that, having started watching cricket in '96. But then, if I take you to '99, and of course, I did say that we'll probably talk about the ones that India won. But I would like to start off with '99, where we lost the series 3-0. Now, that was a time, Andrew, when India was not a major force outside the subcontinent. So, how do you view that series? Because some special things were happening with the Australian cricket team that time. Throw a bit of light on that particular series.
Oh, it was a golden time for the Australian cricket team. I mean, this was Steve Waugh's team in its greatest moments. I mean, this is when they really started to dominate world cricket with not just by winning, but by absolutely killing opposition. And it was just after the '99 50 over World Cup victory, and that summer also. Brett Lee made his test debut against the Indians. He bowled very quick and made an instant impact on Test cricket. And I guess the other memory for me from that series is a beautiful 100 by VVS Laxman at the Sydney Cricket Ground when everyone was falling around him. He played so well. And I guess that was, foreshadowing what he would do against Australia in bigger moments to come. But that's my main memories of that series. That was the beginning of that Steve Waugh era of dominance that was quite unmatched. And also, I think Steve Waugh has to be given a lot of credit because he placed so much importance on the Australian team winning in India. Before then, Australian teams, I don't think had placed the importance that he did on actually going to the subcontinent and winning. And so, he placed a lot of importance on beating India. And when we fast forward to the 2001 series, I think that's really where the modern rivalry began.
Mm. Yeah, taking you to the 2001 series, as you mentioned, Steve Waugh was coming with his team and had termed the series as the final frontier. And of course, Australia won the first test match handsomely by 10 wickets. But something very, very special, as we call for VVS Lakshman as well, happened in that when Lakshman and Dravid played that unforgettable day. I think it was day 4 of the second test. And we all know what happened in that series. So, how do you view that series as an Australian? Do the cricket fans in Australia still remember that series, Andrew?
Most certainly, it's etched in Australian cricket folklore, and I think one lasting effect of that is how unwilling Australian captains have been to enforce the follow-ons in Test matches. That stems right back to that game when Steve Waugh enforced the follow-on. I think the lead was around 270 on the first innings, and the way the Australian team had played in the past, you'd expect them to go on and win that Test match very easily. I think it would have taken their winning streak to 17 test matches in a row if they'd won that game. And then Laxman and Dravid came together in that phenomenal partnership that broke Australian hearts. I think it was probably day 3 and day 4 they batted. And then day 5, Australia had about 350 to chase and were bowled out. And my memories of that are also Harbhajan Singh, a very young Harbhajan Singh, a very feisty Harbhajan Singh. And I mean, you sort of think about, say, a legend like Ricky Ponting. He was embarrassed in that series. He couldn't put bat on ball. Harbhajan Singh was all over him. Um, so yeah, not good memories of that game. It was so painful. Australia win so few series in India, and but an unforgettable performance from Laxman and Dravid. I mean, one of the greatest partnerships in Test cricket history. And as I said, that innings at the SCG, sort of foreshadowed what would have come. I mean, that Laxman innings was beautiful to watch, even for an Australian.
Uh, Andrew, when we talk about the Australians, they were coming on the back of 15 consecutive wins in that series. And do you think somewhere there was a sense of overconfidence or arrogance on part of Steve Waugh and his team, especially applying the follow-on? Although I think cricketing logic did suggest probably that was the right decision. But then do you think that they could have probably avoided giving the follow-on and kept on batting for some more time?
In hindsight, I think they'd say definitely they'd probably agree with you on that. But I don't think it was arrogant, because that's the way they'd played their cricket. And that's, the modern English team think they've revolutionized Test cricket with their Bazball, but Australia under Steve Waugh was playing a very similar brand of cricket. They always went for the win, and if they thought almost a 300-run lead was enough, they wanted to dominate India. So I don't think it was arrogance, but perhaps when you sort of take out those sort of things and you just look at conditions in India. 270 runs can feel like a big lead, but if a couple of batters get in, and those runs can disappear very quickly. So maybe that's where the mistake was, them not thinking, well, actually, let's take this lead to 500 and then make India bat last. But I don't think arrogance was the issue. I think more naivety.
Um, I'd like you to shed some light on Matthew Hayden, Andrew, because
Mm.
very few overseas batters, but there have been batters who have come in and have had standout performances in the last 20-25 years in India. So one person that comes to mind is Alistair Cook in 2012, where England won that series. And then Steve Smith in 2017 had a phenomenal series in India. And even Hashim Amla, less talked about because that was just a two-match test series. But back in 2010, he was just not, we just couldn't dismiss him. However, all these three batters that I've spoken of, Andrew, are ones who were very stoic in their approach, and they
Mm.
accumulate runs at a pretty traditional speed. But if you look at Matthew Hayden in that series, he really dominated the Indians. He dominated the Indian. So what do you think he did right on that series to come up with such incredible numbers on a very tough tour?
I think you can boil it down to one shot. He just nailed the sweep shot, because he was able to work really hard in the lead up to that tour on the sweep shot. There are stories, famous stories of him spending hours in the nets practicing his sweep shot ahead of the series. And I guess sort of the broader context was Hayden's career was on the line. He hadn't really dominated Test cricket by then. He'd been in and out of the team. As crazy as that sounds now, looking back at a player that has 30 Test hundreds, but he was in and out of the team, and his career was on the line, and he just practiced that sweep shot incessantly. And if you can sweep well in India, you can make it very difficult for the opposition to set fields. It opens up other parts of the field. And, you couple that with he's a very good hitter down the ground. Yeah, it was a really amazing series for him. He scored hundreds of runs in that series, and um, it was career defining for him.
Yeah. Looking at the Chennai Test match, Andrew, the third Test match, which Australia lost just by 2 wickets, was again a very close Test match.
Tell me about it. I remember watching this one. I was sitting on my couch with a friend in Sydney, in a place called Double Bay. And, after the second test match had been so painful, we were watching this game live. And when Australia lost, we were very, very upset. We were very upset.
Yeah, but I think if there was any team who would have given an India a run for its money, chasing only one or defending only 155 in the fourth innings, it would have been Australia. And Andrew, in that Test match, there was a moment, if I'm not wrong, when Steve Waugh was dismissed handling the ball. Do you think that that was a critical moment in the game? Because Australia were cruising along in the first innings and were probably set to get more than what they actually ended up getting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to just think back to how many he'd scored at that point. But yeah, I mean, of course, I mean, Steve Waugh handled the balls. Um, and that really shows the pressure of playing in India, Siddharth. That's what strikes me from that, because Steve Waugh is known as the Iceman in Australian cricket, but he must have been really under the pump and feeling the pressure to sort of crack like that. But yeah, of course, it's crucial. I mean, Steve Waugh played so well in that series, and a big partnership with Gillespie, I think, in the second Test match. So yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I was just looking at the score, Andrew, and he was dismissed for 47. So yeah, I mean, he was obviously on way to get a good score, and that's when. So I believe that that was probably one of the turning points, because if Australia had ended up getting about 500, because than what I think they got 391, that sort of got India back into the game.
Mm.
Yeah, that was an incredible series of 2001. Then we went to Australia in 2003 and 4 under the captaincy of Ganguly again, and Andrew, I want you to talk about Saurav Ganguly's 144 at the Gabba, because when he entered the ground, and I was watching it on TV, and Ian Chappell and Tony Greig were commentating, and I could sense from the tone of their voice that they didn't really rate him too highly, and they generally, and even on that day, I think they were of the opinion that he would get out quite quickly against Gillespie, and I think it was Nathan Bracken. So how do you view that particular century? Because I think that probably set the tone for the series.
I think so. I mean, if I, my biggest memory of that series is that Shane Warne and Glenn McGrath were both out of the summer, and what a huge hole obviously that leaves. So clearly India sniffed out that, wow, this Australian team is depleted, and they batted so well right throughout that summer. And of course, Ganguly's innings set the tone, and he was so disliked might be the wrong word, but he used to get under the skin of the Australian team so much, and all the stories of the way he used to annoy Steve Waugh and stuff. So yeah, I mean, great innings, plenty of great innings to come in that summer, but clearly a team without Warne and McGrath was really struggling to get wickets. I mean, when Nathan Bracken's playing Test cricket, and you're in trouble. I mean, no offense to Nathan Bracken, but don't think he should be in many Test teams.
There was Brad Williams also in that series, if I remember correctly. Although I don't know whether he played a test match, but I think he was there in the MCG test. I remember when Sehwag.
No, I think he did play a Test match. He did. You're right,
Yeah.
100%.
And Brett Lee made a comeback in, I think, in either the third or the fourth test match. And I think he took some time by the time he could really get back to his best. But what memories, Andrew, you have of Virender Sehwag's 195 at the MCG?
Well, I mean, that was a phenomenal innings on the biggest stage, the Boxing Day Test match. And I think he scored all the runs on the first day, or in one day, didn't
He was
he? So it
dismissed
was,
on the first day itself.
yeah. So it was a phenomenal innings, and at the time, I mean, you didn't see the sort of stroke play you take for granted now. And Sehwag played the game very differently, but yeah, that's a very well known innings. Um, Fell short of double hundred, and I think he slogged one into the outfield and got caught.
Simon Catich
Yeah,
was there.
great innings. And then, but I remember the SCG. I mean, so I think the broader context. So, Siddharth, we haven't mentioned the broader context of this series was this was the Steve Waugh farewell summer. So he'd announced his retirement at the end of the series. Steve Waugh, a national treasure, a national icon, a man that all Australians looked up to. And this was supposed to be his triumphant farewell summer. He'd been a historically good skipper, someone that Australians, wanted to see do well. He was that sort of underdog. And then in this last series, India flipped the script, didn't they? I mean, it was supposed to be all Australia, it was supposed to be Steve Waugh winning the trophy back, and it didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah. And if you talk about Steve Waugh, Andrew, when Australia lost the 2001 series, by the time then the next year's summer began when New Zealand and South Africa came in. If you remember, he was stripped of his captaincy. So, do you think that that somewhere losing the series in India contributed to the selectors then probably not giving him a longer run for captaincy, or was it
No,
not?
I think No, I think that was more actually when we started to see the Australian selectors split the white ball and red ball team. So I think Ricky Ponting was the white ball skipper and Steve Waugh was the red ball skipper. So I think it was the sort of birth of that switch in thinking where they could have two different skippers. Um, but
Okay.
yeah, I just remember that Sydney Test match in 2004. So it was Steve Waugh's final Test match. Turned up there, hoping to see a fairy tale, Siddharth. And what I saw was India make 705 for 7
Yeah.
in the, in the first innings. Tendulkar 241, never looked like getting out. I'm telling you, his bat could have been 6 feet wide. Everything hit the middle. Laxman 178. That was something. And Australia tried desperately to win that test match, but you can't win a test match when you've conceded 700 in the first innings. But as I said, India just flipped the script and Australia was very much depleted without Warner and McGrath. And I think it showed how difficult it would be for the Australian team post Warner and McGrath, how hard it would be. And we saw, it took them a long time to find a spinner. There was a lot of pressure on the team to perform the way Warner and McGrath's team had, and they weren't able to keep up.
Yeah, you talk about a depleted Australian team, and even then they were able to not lose the series. Yeah, the series was tied 1-1. I think some corners of India they probably look back at the series and see as a missed opportunity. However, I see it as a great triumph because our expectations were so low. We never used to win a test match. So to win a test match and actually end up not losing the series, albeit an Australian team without Vaughan and McGrath was a great achievement for us. So yeah,
I mean,
that's
you look at the batting lineup for Australia. I mean, it is stacked. Langer, Hayden, Ponting, Martin,
yeah,
Waugh, Kadich, Gilchrist. I mean, that's a very, very good top seven.
yeah,
So I think what we saw in that summer was two great batting lineups going head to head. I mean, on the Indian side, Sehwag, Dravid, Tendulkar, Laxman, Ganguly. I mean, you'd expect a lot of runs that summer, and you'd expect a lot of pain for the bowlers, and that's what we got.
great. Going ahead to the 2004 series in India, Andrew, and finally,
Mm.
final frontier was broken, and thanks to Adam Gilchrist, because Ponting was injured and
Mm.
happening. What do you think the Aussies did differently in 2004 than in 2001, Andrew?
They certainly learnt a lot from 2001. They've they've spoken quite publicly, I think, about some of the tactical shifts they made mentally. I think the common phrase is one thing they did was put the ego away. So I think they were willing to be more patient, realize they had to slow down the scoring of the Indian batters, as well as trying to take wickets, but put the ego away, be a bit more patient. And I think the other thing is they did rely on their strength and use their fast bowlers more than they had in previous series. I think they got favorable conditions at times for their tactics, but I think that was the big shift to put your ego away. And we saw some great individual performances. I think Damien Martin's series is one for the ages. But yeah, I think that was sort of the big thing. And I think they just didn't try and find a spinner from nowhere. They just focused on their strength. But they got the rub of the green. I think I can't remember where there was a rain out, but that kind of saved them. And
Chennai,
um,
Chennai it was,
yeah, and
and they
yeah,
got
they got good.
got the conditions in Nagpur, yeah,
Yeah.
which
So
is which is famous for Ganguly opting out of it, faking injury. Yeah, that's what they say at least in the media.
wow, wow. That
Andrew,
series is still talked about a lot here because we haven't won since, and it was historic. And we'll wonder if we'll ever see Australia win again.
you talk about that series, Andrew, and I would like you to talk about Michael Clark, who made his debut and
Mm.
majestic 151, I think it was, on his debut test. Any recollections of that particular innings, Andrew?
Well, again. we saw the birth of a superstar, and he went on to be one of the best batters Australia's ever produced. But I mean that's one of the great performances to make those runs in that situation in a series that Australia need to win. I think he went on, took 6 wickets in the last Test match Australia lost. So what a debut for him! Debut series for him 100, taking a 5-wicket haul in Test cricket. But yeah, the birth of a superstar. I mean, not many Australian players can use their feet the way he's able to. He's so wristy and elegant. And a bit like Steve Smith, one of those rare breed of players that comes from Australia that really loves playing spin bowling.
Great. Now, there was a shift from 2004 onwards, while the rivalry did continue to get stronger, but the series as such, the subsequent series manners were not that sort of memorable in a way, that the home team was winning and the visiting team was not able to mount any serious challenge. But yes, there was the Monkeygate scandal in 2008, and I want you to speak on that, Menas. What do you think? Because uh, we in India, Menas, we like to hide things under the carpet. We like to move on and not talk about what exactly happened. But do you think that it was just a plain case of Andrew Salmon saying something to Harbhajan Singh, and that is it? And or was there something more to it than meets the eye?
No, I think Harbhajan Singh said something to Andrew Simons. I think Harbhajan Singh called him a monkey, and it was reported. And the Australian Cricket Board at the time backed down. And I think it's almost one of those moments where you see a sort of line in the sand moment. That's where we saw the power of Indian cricket. They were already financially starting to become a very strong nation internationally in cricket terms. And they said to Australia, look, we're going to go home. If you take this further, we're going. And Cricket Australia looked at their bank account and looked at what would not come in and went, it's okay, stay, please. We take it all back. And, that has had lasting effects on careers. I mean, Andrew Simons was never the same afterwards. Ricky Ponting, he had to work through a lot of stuff with what happened there. And it was a really tough time. And yeah, I think that's what happened. I have no doubt Harbhajan Singh said it.
Menas, you talk about Andrew Salmons, and in fact, in some of his interviews post that incident, he has mentioned that he was let down by Ricky Ponting. He was let down by the Australian Cricket Board, and we see that there was a decline in his career as well. And do you think that incident probably robbed Australia of some more golden years of Andrew Salmons?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. He stopped enjoying cricket after that. It changed the way he looked at the game. And look, I don't know if Harbhajan Singh said it. Allegedly, maybe he said it, but I think he did say it. That's my opinion. And yeah, I think Andrew Simons was never the same after that. And, he had very well publicized issues off the field. And you're right, he was let down by Cricket Australia. He was let down by Ricky Ponting. And as I said, that's where we saw the first real signs that India's power was going to start to dominate the way world cricket functioned.
I'd like you to we're skipping a few series in between, and I want to go to the
Well,
2013.
if we didn't do that, Siddharth would be here for about 6 hours.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, Manners. So talking about 2013, Manners,
I really want to talk about this one. Yeah, go on.
couple of things happened. One, of course, was the score line. I never imagined in my life that we would actually whitewash, or can I say probably brownwash the Aussies 0 in a series. And the second thing was the famous homework gate scandal, yeah, where 4 Australian cricketers were told
Mm.
to, I think, go back home. And in fact, the irony was that one of those players who was told to go back home actually captained the next Test match. So, Menas, what are your recollections of that series, and do you think that the scoreline actually reflected the way the Aussies played, and why do you think the Australians performed so poorly?
So this was a period of transition in Australian cricket. Mickey Arthur was recently taken over as national coach, and I don't know if his methods were really gelling with the players, and they just could not cope with the conditions. They played terribly. I think you're right. 4 players were suspended for a test match, maybe. Shane Watson was one. Usman Khawaja was one. Maybe Mitch Johnson was another. Um,
I'm
and
forgetting.
yeah,
Yeah.
what was that?
I'm forgetting the fourth one. I don't know who the fourth one was. But yeah,
But yeah. So I mean, Australian cricket was at its very low ebb at that time. It was, and I think I sort of mentioned it before, but there was, a time where so many great players retired over a period of 3 or 4 years for Australia, and the players that came in understandably weren't able to perform to the amazing standards from the players before, and which are a lot of pressure within the Australian team. The 2010-11 Ashes had been an absolute disaster, and by 2013 the team was on the way up, but it hadn't quite clicked yet. And on that 2013 series, it doesn't sound like the team was very happy from all reports. Ed Cowan has spoken about it since then, that it was just a fractured team environment. Seemed like Mickey Arthur's methods gelled with some players, and then other players just didn't want to buy in. And by the end of that series, the team was in disarray. They went to England for the Ashes, and Mickey Arthur was sacked before the Ashes, and Darren Lehmann took over. So it started a huge transition from probably a tough era to a more successful era under Darren Lehmann.
interesting. And when we talk about that particular series, Manners, we also should mention the arrival of Nathan Lyon. I think that was Nathan Lyon's
Mm.
series in India, and who was to believe the kind of success he would have in subsequent series in India. Manners, what do you have to say about Nathan Lyon, and why do you think that amongst some great spinners that have traveled India, including Shane Warne, haven't been able, Muttiah Muralidharan, they have not been able to have had that kind of success in India as Nathan Lyon has had?
It's taken him a while. Like, Lyon has played a number of series in India now, and he did struggle quite a bit at times in series in the past. So I think it's like everything around Lyon's career, it's hard work. There's no shortcuts. He bowls a lot. He trains a lot. He loves it more. He loves bowling spin. I commentate on New South Wales games. He's always there bowling whenever he can. And so that's where I think the success has come. Um, he tried different things. So he's predominantly, he loves to bowl with a lot of overspin in Australian conditions. I think he went to India and tried to bowl differently at times, and that didn't work. So he's just been able to figure it out. But it has taken time. I mean, not many players get as many opportunities as he had. He's probably toured there for Test series 4 or 5 times now. So he's got that experience. I also remember from that series, poor old Mitchell Starc getting out for 99. I don't know if you remember, but
I think it
his
was.
high.
Yeah.
What was that?
Mohali. It was at Mohali,
Yeah,
99.
poor bloke, and he still hasn't scored 100 11 years later. And yeah, so I always remember that from that
I,
series
I,
too.
I hope he doesn't end up like Shane Warne, who I think whose highest score was also 99. So
Also actually quite sweet is that Mitchell Stark's wife, Elisa Healy, has the same highest test score. She was out for 99 in a test match
uh,
recently.
yeah,
So that they share the highest test score. They're the same highest test score.
so much for love and compatibility. Yeah, great. So Menas, moving forward now, and of course the 2014-15 series in Australia, we lost 2-0. But that was, I think, the arrival of or not the arrival, but the consolidation of Virat Kohli as one of the great modern batters. And I would like you to talk about his rivalry with Mitchell Johnson, because we did see that there were a few heated moments in that series between him and Johnson. So any recollections of that particular series?
Yeah, I mean, that summer will always be in the shadow of Phil Hughes's death for me. I mean, he died just before the first. Well, he died just before the first test was going to be played, and then it was delayed a number of weeks. But that is my enduring memory in that first test match at Adelaide after, the first test match after Philip Hughes passed away. I think Johnson hit Kohli or, bowled a bouncer to him, and it just wasn't the same as before. I mean, the summer before, Australia had tormented England. Johnson had just been devastating. I mean, he'd been scary. I mean, Jonathan Trott retired because of him. Graham Swan retired because of Mitchell Johnson. But after what happened to Phillip Hughes, it just wasn't quite the same. And that summer was just overshadowed. That was the thing. I mean, just the cricket was dominated by Steve Smith and Virat Kohli. I think we saw the genuine arrival of two great batters then. That was their summer. And of course, sort of led into the 2015 World Cup. But yeah, that's what I remember more than anything about that summer, was what was going on off the field and how deeply affected the Australian players were. And, I sort of look back on it now a little bit wiser, a little bit older, and I just think that would have been really tough. If you're any of that team, and a lot of the players were at the SCG when Phillip got hit, that would be tough going out there.
Yeah, that was a tough moment for world cricket. Moving forward, Menas, I want to talk to you now about the two triumphs that the Indian team has had in Australia. And
Okay, I've got to go now. Goodbye.
okay, we'll keep it as
I'm
brief as
joking. I'm
possible
joking.
and
I'm
not
joking.
not pain your heart. But yeah, like so 2018, Australia. I mean, many people say that Australia was without Steve Smith and David Warner, and that was the reason why probably Australia lost. But I think that Australia were at full strength in terms of their bowling attack. So, what do you think were the reasons that India were able to win that series?
Well, I think Smith and Warner not being there was a big part of it. I mean, they were Australia's two biggest, best batters by a long way, and they'd been carrying the team. So I think that was a huge part of it. But I also think you can't understate the power of the combination of Ravi Shastri and Virat Kohli, two very aggressive cricketers. Shastri is coach, Kohli is skipper. They saw an opportunity and they took it, and it was a phenomenal performance. So, I mean, there was a great tour for India. There's no doubt about it. That Australia were vulnerable, and they took advantage of it. And, I'll never forget the press conference at the SCG when I think it had been rained out. So the match was a draw, and Ravi Shastri's there. And, I sort of thought about the fact, all the years, and, as a boy watching and coming to Australia, India had never won, and just the passion and joy that came out of him after the game, and when India secured the series. I mean, I don't know if you remember, just talking about, a bullet from India soaring to Australia. He was just so happy. And so he and Kohli, what they were able to do was phenomenal.
Yeah, Menace, and we talk about Cheteshwar Pujara because he was I think the standard performer with the bat in that series. And in 2020, the next series that India won, he was a thorn in the Aussie bowling attack. What do you have to say about Cheteshwar Pujara? How is he viewed amongst the cricket fans in Australia? Is he viewed with great respect?
Yeah, tremendous amount of respect. And you're right, he made a big impression with the performances against Australia. I mean, to come out here and do so well, and again, a classical Test cricketer, digs in, sells his wicket dearly. Australians respect that. So yeah, and I've got to say, in coming series, he was one player I was really wary of. I was like, well, we've got to get Pujara out, because he can hold the innings together and allow the stroke players to bat around him. And yeah, great series for him. Yeah, and player respect a lot.
We talk about 2020 now, and when India won the second time, Manners, and this time Warner and Smith were there, and the bowlers were the same as they were in 2018, and we were dismissed for 36 in the first test at Adelaide. And
Thank you.
what do you think went wrong for Australia in that series after that?
Well, I mean, this has to rate as one of the best series of all time. And I'll point listeners to this show. So I host the Cricket Unfiltered podcast, and one of my co-hosts is Gav Joshi. He's written a book about this series with Bharat Sundaresan, and it's a great read. But this, you're right. I mean, you cannot imagine a team after being bowled out for 36. I think they lost before lunch on the third day at Adelaide. I couldn't imagine them coming back from there. But was it Ajinki Rahane scored a brilliant 100 at the MCG, and India got a famous win there, and then Australia just wasn't able to finish India off at the SCG. And then at the Gabba, we saw, Rishabh Pant and the Indian team chase down over 300 in incredible circumstances. I guess from an Australian point of view, and I always had my doubts about Tim Paine's captaincy, and I think it was horrendously exposed in those last two test matches. I am a bit of a traditionalist, Siddharth. I think generally test captains should be a batter. And I know that goes against what seems to be the modern thinking, but let wicket keepers wicket keep, let fast bowlers bowl fast, and let someone that doesn't have to do anything be the skipper.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I've always been a fan of a fast bowler being a captain. Growing up and watching Wasim Akram and yeah, I mean, but it's I think it just adds a different feel to it. But I get your point that when a captain has no other skill to offer on the field except fielding, and so that he can focus on the captaincy, I think that's where you are coming from.
But my issue is, Siddharth, that it can be fine a lot of the time, but it's when it gets to the real crunch moments, when the pressure is at its most, when the games are on the line, when you're in a tight series, that's when having a wicketkeeper captain or having a fast bowling skipper will get you in trouble. We saw in 2023, Cummins had personal issues that were affecting him, but he lost it on the field. He just lost it by the second test match. Tim Paine at the SCG in that game, sorry, back to 2021, he dropped catches. He allowed India to get off the hook and draw the game. So I think when the pressure is at its most, that's when mistakes start to happen for skippers that are fast bowlers and wicket keepers. And I sort of defer to generations that have gone before us. It used to be very common thinking in Australian cricket that wicket keepers have enough to do, fast bowlers have enough to do. And I think if that was the thinking back in the past, I don't know why it should necessarily change.
Interesting. Menace, we've tried to cover a lot of series in the last 15-20 years in about probably 45 minutes. Just like to take a few more minutes of yours and
Take as long as you want.
Would like to talk to you a little bit away from the theme of India Australia, but yeah, would like to first finish this topic with a very very early preview of the India Australia series in December. Hopefully you'll be able to give me some time closer to that time to do a short episode on that. But right now, I know it's too early to say, Manners, to predict anything. But how do you see the series is going to pan out? It's going to be the first time that India is going to play a five-test series since 1992. So that's going to be interesting. So how do you view that? And what do you think about Brisbane not getting the first game? Because when I saw the schedule come out, I was quite disappointed that the Gabba is not hosting the first Test match.
Yeah. Well, with the scheduling, I think the Gabba's been under some. It's not quite the facilities there aren't quite as strong as in Perth, but I think it actually works for Australia that the fact that the first Test match is in Perth and the second in Brisbane. I think that's good conditions for Australia to start with. But I'm nervous. I mean, this Indian team is stacked. They have a great team. There's no weak spots, and the Australian team I think is vulnerable. I mean, the batting is a bit hit and miss at the moment. There's no doubt the talent of the Australian batting lineup, but it's not generally firing together. No problem with the bowling, but yeah, I'm really nervous. I really think India could come here and win again, 3 series in a row. And the fact that it's a 5-test series, I don't know who that favors, because for Australia's fast bowlers, we saw them start to flag in 2021. So I guess the danger for Australia is, how does our, Cummins, Hazelwood and Stark go through a 5-test series? And then if you start to have to rotate them in and out, who do you replace them with? And then, India have got a ton of fast bowlers. We saw the last series they won here. The whole first choice bowling lineup was gone, and they still won the series. So yeah, I'm nervous, Siddharth. I'm very concerned.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about it, and yeah, I think it's going to be a cracker
What
of
do
a.
you think? What are you thinking?
Um, I think Menas will probably fall short. I hate to,
India does?
yeah, I do feel that we'll probably fall short this time. This is my gut feeling, but you never know. I think, yeah, you better please give me some time before that series starts so that we can do. We'll be in a better place
Definitely.
to talk about that. Menas, three things I want to talk to you about to finish this podcast and this episode.
Great.
And these are three things which are not related to the India-Australia rivalry. One is how what is the experience of watching Test cricket at the MCG on Boxing Day? Because for people like me who have probably never traveled to Australia, so we don't know how it is to experience an MCG Test match, especially on Boxing Day. Give us a bit of a feel about how it is.
Well, I mean, it is it's the biggest day of cricket on the sporting calendar. So, um, yeah, the MCG is an awesome ground. It's a coliseum and it really lights up when it's full. And so, Boxing Day is a tradition for so many Australians and so many Australian families, not just from Melbourne, but from all around the country. And, people come from far and wide to go to this test match. And, of course, it's after Christmas Day here. So everyone's on holiday. No one has to go to work. So, it is a fantastic atmosphere. It's a full ground. And, you know, Siddharth, I'll take you back. I want to tell you about a beautiful day I had, a beautiful day. So I actually didn't go to a Boxing Day test for a little while. I'm from Sydney, and the SCG is my favorite cricket ground in Australia. And, in 2010, 11, finally I'm going to a Boxing Day test match. I'd been to the MCG for other games, but never on Boxing Day. And, me and my friend, I mean, we were so excited. It was the Ashes. Australia had won the last test match. I tell you, I was as happy as I could ever have been walking into that ground, Siddharth. And when I walked out that night at 6 o'clock, I was also as miserable as I've ever been. Australia had been bowled out for 98 on Boxing Day, and England, I think, were none for 150 at stumps. So I had to go home and really to undergo a lot of therapy about that day. So that was my first Boxing Day experience, but it is it's a great place. And I have to say, I think the New Year's test in Sydney is equally as a grand occasion. There's some kind of magic at the SCG that the MCG doesn't have. I mean, those beautiful old Victorian stands at the SCG. I mean, you can feel the history at the MCG, but at the SCG, you can see it everywhere. I mean, the history at the SCG, the change rooms haven't changed since Don Bradman sat in the change rooms. I mean, so the New Year's Test and the MCG Test matches are grand occasions, and for a cricket lover, you know, it, because they're in the holidays, there's people that go every year and they go to every day, and yeah, it's fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Menas. My second question is regarding the baseball. Now,
Yes.
recently
How long
interviewed
have we got?
Yeah, I recently interviewed Lawrence Booth from Wisden Cricket, and he spoke a lot of things regarding baseball, and he has written a book also along with Nick Holt on baseball. So a lot of insight. I think my viewers can go back to that episode. I'll link that in the description. So, what do you have to say about baseball? What are your views on baseball, and do you think that that's a phenomenon that is there to exist for a considerable period of time?
I just hate the whole thing. Like I hate the way the English journalists have been conned. I hate the whole cult around it, and I think there's a lot of Australians that feel the same way. I think if you hear Adam Gilchrist talk about it, he's plainly insulted by the arrogance of this English cricket team to think they've reinvented cricket. So that's the first thing. I have zero time for it. The English journalists have been conned, and it's actually a bit of a disgrace, some of the shit they're writing. But then on the flip side, there are two different things that as an Aussie we have to take into account. One, in England, football dominates everything. For cricket to get any space in the sporting pages on the TV is a good thing, and they have to fight for it. Otherwise, it's more football, more football, more football. So they do have to do more marketing than Australians do. Like they have, like them having a brand of Bazball, whether it's complete bullshit or not, it does work differently in their environment than it does here, because it makes people think, oh, I'll flick over from some shitty football matches on and watch cricket for a change. So I do accept that. Um, and the second thing is, the English cricket team, they've got a loser's mentality. So they need to turn that around and do things like, play baseball and play aggressive. Australians, it comes naturally to want to win and be competitive. I think the English are more interested generally, like at a local level. Cricket's more about have a pint, have a bit of fun. So I think the baseball does add sort of a layer to their cricket that they didn't have before, of a sort of recklessness and aggression, and led by Stokes and McCullum. But yeah, I don't think it's anything radically different to how any cricket team has played in the past. I mean, yeah, I just think it's a bit of a con, and it's certainly helping because people in England are interested in cricket, but the results aren't good. England haven't won a lot of series playing baseball. They got absolutely schooled in India. They got embarrassed in India. I mean, it was the wheels fell off, and the wheels could have fallen off in the 2023 Ashes so easily for England. But I don't think the tactics of Australia were particularly good, sort of from losing Nathan Lyon. I mean, England are probably lucky they didn't lose 5-0.
Interesting. My last question, and this will end this podcast, Andrew, is about the Ashes in general and how. So for an Indian like me, I always
Mm.
feel that the English and the Aussies value Ashes more than any other series. Now, of course, India, thanks to its performances on the field and its success off the field, is now in the last 10-15 years has been taken more seriously by the English and the Aussies. But you still think that somewhere when an Australian cricketer or an English cricketer goes out to the field against India, it matters less than probably in an Ashes?
Yes, but I think matters less is not the right term. I think there's just something extra in Ashes series that you can't replicate, and you cannot replicate, what is it, 150 years of history. I mean, you cannot expect the Australia-India rivalry to have the same richness that the Australia-England rivalry has, because it is so, ingrained. I mean, you go back to like Bodyline in the 1930s. I mean, you learn about these, things as a kid. I mean, these made our nation. Playing cricket against England made our nation in so many ways, along with fighting in world wars. But so much of our identity is wrapped up in playing cricket and playing cricket against England that it will take time for the Australia-India rivalry to sort of come to that level. I'm not saying it won't, but it's so unique. I mean, there's not many sporting rivalries that go back to sort of 1877, I think, that first Ashes test. So, yeah, that's where I think this England v Australia rivalry just has that edge, and like it drives both countries mad. I mean, during the Ashes last summer, the English lost it. I mean, they were yelling Rolf Harris sledges at the Australian players in the first test. In the second test, the Lords members, who were supposed to be the most proper English um, fans, turned on the Aussies in the most unseemly way. For the rest of the series, the abuse the Australians copped was unmatched. I mean, it does something to the fans, and it's a very, very it's a very strong rivalry and very passionate rivalry. And I mean, as a neutral, it must be fantastic to watch, because I lose my friggin' mind during the Ashes, because I really, they drive me nuts.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I do look forward to every Ashes, especially since 2005 when England started becoming more competitive. I think, yeah, and I'm sure that we're going to have an exciting Ashes series when the baseball is, yeah. Okay, great. So thank you so much, Menace, for being on this podcast and sharing your valuable insight on so many different topics that we have touched upon today. Of course, the main being the India-Australia rivalry, and we look forward to having probably one more podcast some other time in future. Yeah, but thank you so much, Menace, for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great to talk to you. I urge all the listeners to check out the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. And also, I produce a lot of podcasts at piccolopodcast.com.au. So if you listen to podcasts, check them out. But it's been great to talk to you. Hopefully, as the Australia-India rivalry grows, so does ours, Siddharth.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look forward to that. So yeah, I'll post the links of Mena's podcast on the video description. So please do check out that. And till the next episode of the SNS Cricket Diaries, take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.